connecting. I hope it's recording.
It is.
It is? Oh, you see it?
Yep.
Okay, so that's
You
how.
can always pause or stop until we start in 2 minutes. The controls at the bottom now allow you to pause or stop, so you could begin recording officially when everyone comes in. You start greeting people.
Ready?
I resumed recording.
Okay, here we go.
All right. Hello. Now here they come. So we're going to give everybody a minute or two to get in here. And I like seeing people's faces. So Joshua, hi Josh. Oh, it's so good to see you. Nancy. Oh, I just love seeing everybody. This is the thing I miss the most about meeting in person with Austin Nonprofit Meetup, is not being able to see people. So how many people are in right now?
16.
16? So let's go ahead and get going. All right, welcome everybody once again to Austin Nonprofit Meetup. I'm Nancy Manning, the founder of Power Your Mission and Austin Nonprofit Meetup. And for those of you who are new, we've been meeting once a month for nearly 2 years now. And we'd love to have you join us on the meetup.com platform, where you can see all the topics that we've covered previously. I'd also like to invite you to join our closed Facebook group, which is originally titled Austin Nonprofit Meetup. So let's I never know exactly how to make the thing advance. There we go. Let's take care of some housekeeping issues real quickly. Again, we have our Rockstar Zoom host, Shannon Mantram, helping us behind the scenes, or behind the curtain, as she likes to say. If you have any issues using Zoom or anything else that comes up during our Zoom meeting, please choose Shannon's name in the drop-down menu of your chat box to ask her the question. But otherwise, please try not to use the chat box. As we say nearly every time, it is a bit distracting to the speakers to see the typing in the chat box. However, this time we are changing the format. After each topic is covered, we're going to invite questions by inviting you to turn on your video and your mic if you don't have it on already. We are asking that you keep your mic off during the time that we're not inviting questions. And if you have your mic on and you're asking questions and people, it's hard to get a word in edgewise, as you know, people are sort of talking on top of each other, just raise your hand. If you're on video, we'll see it. Or you can type in the chat box that you have a question and Shannon will let us know. That way we sort of, uh-oh, sorry. Well, that's not good. Sorry, guys. All right.
Fun music, though.
A little Beatles. Yeah, nothing wrong with a little Beatles. All right. Let's see. Now it is time to introduce my co-host, Sean Kosofsky. I am very honored to have Sean here today from Mind the Gap Consulting. So Sean, why don't you say hi to the nice people and tell them a little bit about yourself?
Excellent. My name is Sean Kosofsky. I live in San Francisco, California, but I've lived in a bunch of different places, including Raleigh, North Carolina, and New York City. But I hail from Detroit, Michigan, a proud Midwestern boy, born and raised, lived there for about 32 years. I've been in nonprofits now for about 28 years. I got my start very young at 16, working at the YMCA, spent about a dozen years working in LGBT advocacy in Michigan. Then I've done some work around women's health and reproductive health. And now I run a climate change organization in San Francisco. I have my own consulting practice where I help nonprofits with executive director issues, fundraising issues, and board issues. I go by the nonprofit fixer. I'm sort of a generalist, so I just help nonprofits fix things that are broken. And that's just a little bit about myself.
Wow. So Sean's the kind of guy that does everything. You know, he runs a nonprofit, he is a big-time consultant, and he jumps out of bed in the morning to write blogs. That's the kind of energy he has, way more than my energy. All right. Well, let's go forward. You received a toolkit, and you know that for a long while I've shared with you that I like to look at nonprofits as having 5 focus areas: programs, communications slash outreach, resource development slash fundraising, operations, and people, which are your board, staff, and volunteers. So today we're going to talk about your people. In that toolkit, I just wanted to point out that sometimes with the links, you have to click twice, I think. So it's not that there's anything wrong, you just have to mess with it a little bit. So we're going to start with volunteers. And as I said in my toolkit, the success and sustainability of your nonprofit is often contingent upon having a very strong volunteer program. Volunteers provide a means of building your capacity, supporting your paid staff, and enhancing mission delivery. But to get that strong program, volunteer program, requires these 3 components: the policy, the program manual, and the handbook, all of which are provided for you in that toolkit. Again, just have to click the links. So I saved you a lot of work there. I even talk about how to develop your message to recruit the right volunteers into the right spot. So I'd like to turn it over to Sean just to talk briefly about some specific ways you might use volunteers.
Yeah, I think that in a time of COVID, we might need some interesting and sort of different ideas for how to use volunteers. I think folks are familiar with existing ways of using volunteers, everything from, back when stamps had to be licked. I think they're all now self-adhesive and people were stuffing envelopes and doing all sorts of things with volunteers. But I wanted to go over just a couple of concrete ones that I've found nonprofits using during COVID that I think is really important. And one of them is, of course, the board of, I'll just go over 2 ones that are easy. In a time of COVID, I think that spending this time investing in your board is really critical. Now is the time that if you don't have functioning committees on your board, you should be creating these committees, populating these committees with members of the larger community. If your fundraising committee or governance committee or program committee of the board is kind of empty and it's hard to get quorum and it's hard to get these meetings to happen, now's the time to go out in the community and get 5, 6, 8 people onto these different committees, right? Because one, you'll start spotting who your future leaders are. If someone starts showing up and participating in a committee as a volunteer, a non-voting member of a volunteer of a committee, you can start noticing if their commitment is there and how creative they are and whether they actually might make future board material or be a great activist or potentially staff one day. So board committees are really critical, and then moving folks into higher and better board roles. Again, right now people are like, hey, a lot of the work we were doing is on hold because of COVID. So we're going to really like double down and look at some systems that we can control, like our board development, diversity, diversity by skill set, race, geography, demographics, whatever. Also board of advisors. A lot of nonprofits that don't currently have a board of advisors are looking into a board of advisors. Now, board of advisors can be a lot of different things. I have some tools around this, but I've always thought of board of advisors as a group of people that you don't require to actually meet. The requirements for them to do something is really, really low. The barrier of entry is really low. However, you want to be affiliated with them and they want to be affiliated with you. So it's like this perfect kind of middle zone. So you could create a board of advisors with just big name, heavy hitter type folks, elected officials, celebrities, folks that want to be affiliated with your nonprofit, and maybe you engage them once or twice a year. Maybe you invite them to your key event. Maybe you ask them to invite 3 people to a cultivation event or something like that, or you ask them to, sign on to a public statement for something you're doing. Board of advisors can be a really powerful tool to identify folks who want to keep you guys front of mind. In addition to that, Facebook fundraisers are an area where I think people are dramatically underutilizing volunteers. Facebook fundraisers have become a powerful vehicle. It is a tiny part of the Facebook platform, but it is a peer-to-peer platform. Excuse me. So many people know peer-to-peer platforms basically involve something we like to call relational organizing. Like back before there was an internet, the way that people did stuff was that we did stuff because our friends, neighbors, and family members asked us to, right? Nowadays, if an organization sends out a blast email to do something, please sign this pledge, please give us money, it is way less effective than if that same email came from my neighbor. So people are learning through relational organizing or peer-to-peer organizing that if I'm Sierra Club or I'm the ACLU and I want to put out a call to all of our users, I'm going to ask my top activists to put it out to their network, because people are way more likely to do it if the ask comes from someone they know. So Facebook fundraisers work because it is a peer-to-peer platform. If I ask my friend, if Nancy and I are friends on Facebook and she sees that I'm running a Facebook fundraiser, she may not even know anything about the cause that I'm raising money for, but because she's my friend, she's more likely to give because I asked, right? People give because people give to people, and people are more likely to give because someone they know asked them for help. Excuse me. And so peer-to-peer fundraising platforms, and Facebook is the only social media platform that has successfully actually cracked the nut and cracked the code, on Facebook, on peer-to-peer fundraising platforms. So I mentioned this as a volunteer thing, because if your nonprofit is set up with Facebook fundraisers, if you set up your checking account, you've been verified as a nonprofit, then your Facebook page has the donate button that you're allowed to change your main blue button to. And there should be a fundraiser option on the left-hand side of the page. You could start encouraging all of your volunteers, as one of the core things that they do with your nonprofit is to start a fundraiser and run a fundraiser. And if your nonprofit is tracking birthdays, Facebook pings everyone 14 days before their birthday to start prompting them to run a fundraiser for a nonprofit. So if you can get to your volunteers 15 days before their birthday, you should be asking them, hey, Facebook's going to ask you to run a fundraiser. We'd like you to pick us. Right? So if you track birthdays of your donors and fundraisers, of all of your supporters, you could begin nurturing a year-long revenue stream of people running fundraisers for you. Some organizations have hundreds and hundreds of Facebook fundraisers being run for them, and they're making millions and millions of dollars. I train nonprofits how to run and lead Facebook fundraisers and Facebook campaigns, where you run 30 people all at once during Giving Tuesday to raise like $30,000 in 30 days, which you can totally do. It's one of the courses that I offer, but it's one of the great ways to use volunteers year round. I even have like an infographic that you can put up on your website saying, these are the 5 steps we need you to do to run a Facebook fundraiser for us, all volunteers, right? Another thing you can do with volunteers during a time of COVID is quality control. This is like crowdsourcing, right? So if there's stuff that you have going on inside your organization that you could use help with, ask your volunteers around the country, hey, we need people to go through our website and let us know where there are grammar problems, punctuation problems, broken links. Is there anything on our Facebook page that's looking funky? So quality control is also one of these things that folks can do from anywhere, right? So we want to make sure our nonprofit, that no links are broken, no resources are not downloading. So crowdsource out to your volunteers and have them clean up your digital shop, basically, right? All of your digital platforms. Another thing you can do is prospecting. So if you don't have a great list of potential donors out there, like foundations, have your volunteers go out and track them down. If you're a national nonprofit, have one volunteer in every state search the top 5 foundations in that state that fund your topic area, and then bring you that list, right? Or if you're local, say, please look around and find, go out and research through GuideStar or the Foundation Center or whatever it is. Please go out and hunt down the top foundations in our region that fund this kind of work and bring those back to us, right? So prospecting, crowdsourcing. And those are some of just the easy, quick ways I've found that some people are utilizing volunteers, because what you don't want to do is let your volunteer list atrophy. And virtually everyone nowadays has access to an internet connection, so you should be able to use people remotely. But those are just a couple ideas for how to use volunteers in a time of COVID.
Thanks, Sean. I took your little training on Facebook, Facebook fundraising, I think. What was it called?
8 expert tips to raise 10,000 or more with Facebook fundraisers.
Yeah, it was so good, and I learned a lot. I would really encourage people to take that training. That's somewhere on your website. They can do that.
I will drop a link to that course in the chat.
Okay. Yeah, it was well worth it. I learned a lot, and the fact that it's something that can be done continually reminds me a little bit of a monthly giving program. That type of predictability if you keep it going. All right. Well, thank you. So there's one other thing I wanted to mention that you said about committees and then having those funnel up to board people eventually. When I was the executive director at Travis Audubon, there were like 16 committees. And that's what we did is they learned a lot, we learned a lot from each other, and you could identify leadership ability working with those committee people, and then eventually use your committees as a recruitment place to get those folks to move up to your board. So I think that's an interesting concept you raised. All right. All right. So now we want to open up to, if anybody has any questions about volunteers, can you go ahead and turn your mics on? This is a brand new way we're doing this for those of you who joined us late. If you have a question, I don't have my chat box open. Do you, Shannon? So if anybody is...
They are welcome to get into the chat bar. I'm not
Okay.
seeing anything here yet, though.
I see Cynthia's smiling face. Hi, Cynthia. Okay, I just figured out how to use the little scroll down things there. Okay. Okay, now I'm seeing people. That's nice. Does anybody have a question?
I guess I'll try one since you are talking to me. I would say...
Cynthia, turn your mic up. I can't hear you.
Uh-oh. How about now? Am I close enough?
A little bit better.
Okay. So we have a good amount of volunteers, a good base of volunteers. I guess my general question is, like, what is your best advice for how to just engage people right now for something like that, for, you know, Facebook fundraising or what have you? I feel like it's something that we've put in a volunteer newsletter, for example, but what's the best, most effective way to really get people excited about doing something like that besides, you know, the birthday thing?
Sean, you want to take that?
Sure. It's sort of a broad question because there's a lot of ways to tackle this. If you have an email, I think that we tend to underutilize our own email lists. We undersurvey them. So like everyone out there who does data and testing and evaluation says that nonprofits rarely ask their own base a question. So you could put out emails that say 3-question survey. Are you interested in doing this kind of work, or this kind of work? And simply by clicking, it tags their record in your CRM as being interested in a certain kind of thing. So they don't have to fill out a form. So that's one way, is like little surveys, little mini surveys. Are you interested in doing stuff locally? Are you interested in doing stuff for fundraising, or are you interested in doing something with blah, blah, blah? So little 3-question surveys or quizzes, what you're really doing research on your universe, and you're really just tagging them as people that are then going to be pulled for a direct communication. So you can then call them or email them directly and say, here are 3 different things you can do. That's one way that you can utilize a good list of volunteers. A second thing you can do to keep people sort of primed is to be really engaging. Like right now, things are really depressing. I mean, there's like been nothing but since March, but like a cascade of bad news. There literally I was warning people in March that there's going to be nothing but a cascade of bad news in the economy till the end of the year, right? There's going to be hurricanes in the fall, there's going to be wildfires in the summer, and there's going to be all the PPP layoffs. The companies that are getting these PPP dollars are going to have to start laying people off in waves. All of the eviction freezes are going to be coming. Like there's going to be lots of bad news. People are looking for optimistic news right now. To any extent that you possibly can, put out optimistic, positive imagery, asks, requests, and positivity. There's a group in Grand Rapids, Michigan, a national group called Pause with a Cause, and they immediately identified the main universes of people that they needed to talk to, and volunteers were one of them in April. And they started putting out positivity updates, right? Like the dogs still need us. The people that need the dogs still need us. We still need you, right? Like it's going to be tempting to think about just mutual aid organizations, but the need is still there for all of our nonprofits. Are you still with us, right? So engagement will be key. If you can invent sort of a way to keep people engaged, it could be a petition. It could be just an excuse to get people to fill out a form or take action on a piece of legislation, or contact your lawmakers and tell them that you love our charity, or like could be anything, but keeping them sort of doing something positive instead of like focusing on whatever is negative in the world keeps your list warm. Some people are deliberately not contacting their lists right now for fear that people are inundated or overwhelmed. It's the opposite. People are hungry to do something locally. They're hungry to do something online, which is why I think people are hungry to donate right now. 87% of the population is still working and people have money. And so Facebook fundraisers for me are sort of like the sweet spot. It is fast, unrestricted money, and people can use their own networks to fundraise from, and they're looking for some way to get involved. So those are just a couple ways that I think could be useful, but I wouldn't hesitate to put your board members to work calling your top volunteers, the people that are the most engaged on your Facebook page, or the people that take the most actions on your website, or the folks that open the most emails. Contact those people and say, would you like to get involved? We could use you now. Here are 3 ways, using that 3-question survey.
Thank you so much.
That's really good. Thank you, Sean. All right. Anybody else before we move on? Sounds like we're good. Okay. Oh, wait, one more. All right. We're at your staff. And in the toolkit, I did provide you information and resources for internal staff relationships, but let's talk about the CEO relationship with the board. And getting clear on who does what is always a first step in building that constructive partnership between leadership, staff, and your board. So Sean has, do you want me to go forward with these 2 slides?
Sure, you can show that slide right now, and
Okay.
folks can make it bigger if they want to. But this is a image that I created, which has become very popular among folks who engage with my consulting practice because, and it's on my website, but we can give it to you as a PDF or as a PNG file or whatever. But essentially, I've decided to break down the 10 top responsibilities of a nonprofit executive director. Do you want me to go through these, or do you want me to just quickly cover the graphic, Nancy?
Let's see here.
I can just breeze through them really quickly in case people can't see them. So essentially, the 10 top areas of an ED for anyone who's a new executive director, or you've been on the job less than 2 years, or you're thinking about becoming a nonprofit executive director, it can be really mysterious. Like, what does an executive director do? Do they fundraise? Do they hire and fire people? Do they just like hide behind their desk when all their responsibility gets shifted to the deputy? Like, what does an executive director actually do? So I put all this into a graphic. And these are the main buckets for a nonprofit ED. Now, this doesn't take into consideration private foundations or giant institutions like universities, right? This is like most public charities. So on the left from 1 to 10, I'll just quickly breeze through these big areas of responsibility. I also have a course that I sell. I'm not trying to use today to sell my courses, but there's a much deeper dive into this called the Executive Director Bootcamp, where we go into all of these layers. But the first one here is leadership. And this is like everything from being optimistic. I sometimes joke that you have to be the CEO of your nonprofit, the chief of enthusiasm and optimism. Anyone running for office, anyone leading anything, you have to believe you're going to win. You have to believe you're going to hit your mission. So leadership is about modeling good behavior. It is about being visible out in the community and not being insular. Fund development. I don't care what kind of nonprofit you have. If you hate fundraising or love fundraising, the executive director must be the top fundraiser for the nonprofit. Even if you delegate a lot of it to a development director, you cannot give it all away. You are still the person that your donors, your major donors, want to hear from and talk to. Board support and development. The executive director needs to be the person helping this volunteer board do their job better. So you work with them. It's a partnership. I hope that nonprofit boards see their ED as a partner and not just as an employee. But the ED really does need to help build the board and develop the board. Number 4 is financial management. All the money coming in, all the money going out. So all money coming in is typically fundraising, and all the money going out is accounting. So budgeting is thinking to the future. Budgeting is basically guessing what kind of money is going to come in and what kind of money is going to go out. And then accounting is the actual data. It's what happened in the past. So budgeting and accounting, those 2 tasks are something that an ED needs to know how to do. I tend to outsource that work so that I'm just kind of peripherally involved every single month with the bookkeeping, but I'm totally on top of every dollar coming in and out of the organization. Human resources, all hiring, all firing, all volunteers, all carbon-based humans that are inside your nonprofit are human resources. And whether they are volunteers or vendors or whoever, you are responsible for all of it. Operations and technology, if you have a physical building or if your team is using Asana or Microsoft, all operations, how does the work actually get done? You need to be on top of that. Some of these things are delegated to a deputy if you're lucky enough to have a deputy, but generally, or an operations person. But in general, as the ED, as Kathleen Sebelius learned running the Department of Health and Human Services, when she rolled out Obamacare, she probably wasn't dealing with Obamacare's website at all on a day-to-day level, but the day it was released, it collapsed and she lost her job, right? Because at the end of the day, she did not ensure that the people who were doing it were on top of the technology lasting, right? It was a big embarrassment. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. I only recently elevated this to one of the top 10 because I used to infuse it through all the other ones, but I think it's now time that it become a fundamental part of what executive directors do, is push the organization at every single level, that you cannot reach your mission, you cannot be successful unless you are constantly thinking about dismantling oppression, bringing everyone with you toward the finish line of your organization. And diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that is a mandatory thing to be successful in nonprofits. Compliance and best practices. This is basically saying, are you flying solo and just making stuff up as you go along, like a lot of us do on some tasks? Are we all building the plane as we're flying it? But are you at least trying to say, okay, I'm generally going to keep my overhead below 30% because that's an industry average. I'm basically going to try to keep my open rates for my emails at 20% because that's whatever, right? So those are things to stay on top of. Community relations and communication, just really quickly, you need to be public. Even if you're an introvert, you need to be out shaking hands and talking to people and being like out in the community. If you're insular and just saying, I'm just going to focus on my job and not work in coalition and not meet the larger community and just sort of hide and do the basic things in my job description, you will never be as successful as someone who decides to really engage with the larger community. You should meet your service population, you should meet your stakeholders and get out of the office. Finally, programs and advocacy. Every ED out there, every executive director out there needs to understand fully what the activities and program mixture is doing in the organization. I've come into lots of organizations. This is my 5th executive director job. Sometimes it takes me up to 6 months to understand what the heck my nonprofit is even doing. Why was this decision made? Why does our website do this? Why are we only serving people in this county? Like, in really understanding why those things are connected to each other, and then tweak it. And then the advocacy part of that is, are we here to feed the hungry or are we here to end hunger? Right? Am I going to serve individual people, or am I going to turn off the spigot where the problem is and address policy? Right? So organizations ultimately have to make this decision, and the ED does. Do I feed the hungry or do I end hunger? It's the larger advocacy role versus a charitable role. And so you need to make that decision. Doesn't mean you have to be political, but you do need to make that decision. So that's this graphic. And I hope that, I know I was moving very quickly, but there's this graphic can be shared with everyone today.
Wow, that was a lot. And I love this. I love that graphic. Thank you. Here's your next one on that topic.
We're loaded with good infographics today.
Do you want to address this one, or?
Oh, sorry, my screen looks different than yours because I'm pulling up my larger versions of these graphics on my own page. Okay. Now this is the get in your lane. I designed this I had a designer create this sheet. This is actually 2 sides. It's a 2-page document. We have them side by side so you guys can see them. Essentially, what I wanted to do was tell board members and staff members to get in your lane, like stay in your lane. So it is literally like a road with people on bikes. It is this little metaphor for like stay in your damn lane. So to orient you to the graphic, essentially at the top, there are different roles like the executive director, the board chair, the officers, and then there's the staff. All of those roles are across the top. And then there's a red bar across the top that says, do this. And below that is the list of stuff you should do. And then the red bar at the bottom says, do not do this. Don't do this. These are the things you should refrain from doing, right? And so, for example, we'll move from left to right for the executive director. the person is in charge. What they do is hire staff and vendors. They manage the staff and vendors. They lead all fundraising and planning for the organization. They create all the operational policies for the organization, and they work with the board to do this. And then as you move down that road, you get that lane, you can see more of it. At the bottom, it says, don't do this. Don't allow the board or staff to see unnecessary drama, right? So one of the things the executive director should do is kind of shield people from things that are going wrong in the organization that they don't need to know about. Of course, you don't want to conceal financial strain. You don't want to conceal things out of lack of transparency issues. But if you have board members bickering and fighting at a board meeting, you don't need the staff to see that. If it's something you can put a fire out. So part of the buffer role of an ED is to just make sure that you're just like reducing friction and reducing conflict to the extent that is practical, right? So just reduce the drama that goes on with small organizations or even large organizations. As you move to the right is the board chair. This is another one that's sort of like a doozy. The board chair is supposed to lead and manage board processes. They are supposed to populate committees and be an ex officio of all committees. I believe that. And follow all the bylaws. And as you go down there, they are the sole supervisor of the executive director. So in some situations, you might not have the chair be the sole supervisor because there's some drama or the chair is not very good at HR. So the chair may appoint someone who is an HR expert or someone who's really good at this. But in general, the chair is the person who's the main day-to-day contact with the ED, usually. That's why it's so important to get a good chair. So as you move across the sheet, you'll see that I have these things laid out for every group. The board at large has its own lane. The vice chair basically is mostly empty because the vice chair is there in case of the absence of the chair. It is largely a ceremonial role. So it is like the vice president. They break ties, and they like sort of like fill in should the chair be absent. On page 2, on the right-hand side, you can see that I then start talking about different officer roles of the board, the treasurer, the secretary, and committee chairs. And then the final lane is the staff. And this is where you get into things like making sure that the staff aren't taking direction from the board. The staff work for the ED, period. The board should not be issuing assignments to staff members. If the board is talking with the staff, which can be risky, because if the board and staff are talking regularly, even as friends, it can blur into the lines of thinking like they're giving assignments away. Oh, Jack, it was great to see you this weekend. Can you get me that board report that I asked for last Thursday? You start feeling like you've got multiple bosses, right? So the ED needs to get a handle on how communication is happening between the board and staff, but the staff need to be clear that they take direction from one person, their supervisor, period. And the board only supervises one person, the ED, if you're lucky enough to have an ED. So that's what this graphic is about. It helps get, a lot of organizations give away like a job description or here's the roles and responsibilities of the board. I decided to do it visually so people can see like neat defined lanes. Your organization may be a little bit unique, but we thought this graphic would be helpful for folks today.
Sean, thank you. And there are some questions for you, but I want to do one little piece first. In terms of the CEO board relationship, I'm hoping some of you had time to read these short little blogs. There's 3 of them. The one thing I did not add to the toolkit is this. If the relationship between CEO and the board has deteriorated to the extent that the conflict is high, and people are maybe thinking of quitting, leaving the board, or ED's going to quit, or ED's going to get fired, I want you to think about this. Whenever there's a transition like that happens in a nonprofit, it can impact the nonprofit pretty negatively. So I'd like for you to think of another option if you get to that point. In my blogs, I'm telling you how not to get to that point, what communication guidelines and strategies to use so you don't get to that point. But what happens if you do get to that point of high conflict? Well, I'm a conflict resolution specialist. I am a certified mediator. And one thing I want you to know about conflict is that it can and does present positive opportunities. So do not throw in the towel until after you contact me, and we'll talk about whether mediation is appropriate. Okay, let us move to some questions. I want to, can you see the questions on that Thea and Peter wrote in? Would you,
Yep.
can you take those, Sean?
Sure. Thea's question is, that is a lot of, it's a comment, that is a lot of responsibility, and I see why EDs can feel overwhelmed daily. Rarely in corporate America have I seen one person accountable for so much in an organization unless they are, the founder and the business is small. So when I say that these are the areas of responsibility, I don't care if it's $100 million nonprofit, like Environmental Defense Fund, or if you're a small community group with only one staff. This is part of the dysfunction and challenge of being in a small nonprofit, because it's just like a small business. I have my own small business. I am a solopreneur. My consulting practice is just me. I am right now responsible for the tech. I am responsible for the compliance with the state, the compliance with the city, all my vendors. The entrepreneurial spirit that is required to be an executive director is frequently discounted. If you can run a nonprofit and have at least your finger on the pulse of all of those areas, you are a master entrepreneur in my mind. So, and we don't give people entrepreneurial or business acumen credit enough when they're an executive director. So when I lay out those 10 areas, it doesn't mean that all 10 of them are taking up 10 hours a day each, right? In fact, your job, if you can, is to delegate all of these things away so that you are merely supervising them and checking on them, but they are ultimately your responsibility. Too often EDs say, oh, I've assigned all the fundraising to my development director, as if they can just go out there and make it rain, right? If you're lucky. But, and the bookkeeping, I've seen EDs say, I have no idea where the money's going or where the money is spent, because they have a bookkeeper and they never check. And then there's fraud because they're not spot checking the invoices once a quarter, right? So you need to stay on top of all these things, but in order for it not to overwhelm you, I do think you need to batch your time. Like 2 hours a month, I'm going to look at the financials. 2 hours a month, I'm going to evaluate my HR stuff. 2 hours a month, I'm going to, and then it becomes a lot more manageable, right? But this is a giant amount of work. And so you need help, which is why the board needs to help and why you need capacity. And then the next question was,
By Peter.
Are you saying that the chair should or should not be the main funder? No, never said that. The chair should not be the main funder of the organization. I actually don't think that. I think the executive director should be the top fundraiser. That's what I said. The executive director of the nonprofit should be the top fundraiser in the organization. Even if they have a development director, the top foundations, the top donors, they want to meet the ED. The development director should be lining up those meetings, and the ED walks in and closes the deal. And if you're not a good fundraiser, you need to learn it. But the chair, if your chair is the top financial donor to the organization, you are in danger. And I don't mean to say like this is a horrible thing, but you are at incredible risk, because people are not logical. They are psychological. They are emotional. And all it takes is for the biggest pot of money possible, being the chair, not being excellent at their job. And then people on the board are like, Jack, it's really time for you to go. It's time for you to sunset. And then the chair is like, what do you mean? I've been here all along. I'm going to cut my donations. You don't want your top funder to be your board chair. If that is the situation that you are in, you need to work on not having that be the case within 2 years.
But you will be talking though about the role that boards have in fundraising as a whole. You're coming
I will
up,
talk
right?
about that a little bit at the end. Boards absolutely are. Technically, we're going to talk about this again. I'll just reiterate it because it's this important, and most nonprofit folks have never heard this said this way before. Nonprofits are still corporations. They are not-for-profit corporations, and all corporations have owners, and nonprofit boards are the owners of the nonprofit corporations, and all owners of all corporations are responsible for revenue. Period. So nonprofit board members own the corporation. They have to be responsible. You can't just pass a budget and say, we're going to raise and spend this and then walk away. It's immoral, right? And it's actually illegal. So you can't just say, we're going to go raise all this money and then assign it to someone else. As a board member, you have to make sure that that budget is resourced, which means you have to fundraise. This is legal in all 50 states. You have to be responsible for making sure that revenue is generated. But we just let nonprofit boards get away with not doing that, and it's not okay.
Yeah, it's part of it. Sean and I both have courses that deal with fiduciary duties, and that duty is part of the duty of care. It's a legal duty every board member is required to comply with.
Every corporation in every state. This is
Yes.
standard business law.
Yes,
Duty of care,
absolutely.
duty of loyalty, duty of obedience.
Okay, Sean, take this one too. What are the common sources of funding for the ED's salary?
I've seen individual funders come in and say, I'm going to guarantee Sean's salary for the next 3 years, but that's not a great position to be in, but in another way, it is a good position to be in. The ED does a little bit of everything, so it generally comes from the general operating budget. I want to encourage everyone to push and push and push, especially during a time of COVID, to push every funder that you have to drop all the restrictions on your funding. There has never been a time where people are more open to turning their program grants into general operating grants. Anyone who funded you to do something last year, go back to them and say, we need the flexibility during a global pandemic, a once in a century pandemic with an unprecedented financial downturn. We need the flexibility to spend the money how we want to spend the money if you want us to survive this thing, right? So for an ED salary, they should be pulling that from general operating. They could be pulling it from Facebook fundraisers. Again, a Facebook fundraiser alone sometimes can make $8,000, $10,000. And if you have lots of them running throughout the year, you could do it that way. You can take a piece of every grant and just put it in towards salary. We tend to think of salary as overhead, and it's not. Salary is also program. Every person in an organization is doing something to achieve the mission. They are partly program. The IRS doesn't give us neat lines of what qualifies as program and what doesn't qualify as program. So we can be flexible here. As the ED, I'm supervising all the program stuff. So definitely I could use program money to pay for my salary. Absolutely. So if you want to get more creative around this, we can talk more at some other time, but the ED salary can come from virtually every source. And we need to push funders to realize that overhead is the actual work of the organization. Overhead has a dirty word, but it's really like you're paying the actual carbon-based humans that are making the work happen. Like that's the actual work of the organization.
You know, I used to give our accountant, the one nonprofit, every person's salary, I would break it up by percentage. They did 10% in fundraising. They did 30% in programs, you know, so that we could do our page 9 and 10 of the IRS 990 correctly. So just another thought. Yeah. Okay. How about, are there any more questions? We probably need to move to the next topic here. Does anybody have another question?
Yeah, I think we need to move on.
Okay.
Time-wise.
Sean, tell us about board members, meetings, and money.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen so that folks can see some slides that I'm working from here. Just give me a second. All right. Okay. Can everyone see this? Where it says the members. Excellent. All right. So.
Oops, wait a minute. I need to get back in. I had to leave there for a second.
Thumbs up. Can people see my screen?
Yeah, you're good, Sean. We got it. You're good.
Okay, good. So I use a 3-part framework for how I talk about the board, only because it demystifies it and makes board building simpler to just talk about it in terms of 3 M's. So we're going to talk about the members of the board, which is like the actual human beings that make up your board. 90% of what a board is people, like people we know, people we like, it's us, it's people. So I break them down as like the members of the board, right? The actual like 8 to 12 people that are probably on your board. And then we talk about the meetings. So boards typically do their work when they gather. So when those human beings actually get together in a room, that's called a meeting. And all the governing, all of the supervision, all of the due diligence, all of the decision-making happens in a meeting. So you got the members, you got the meetings, and then you got the money. The 3rd M is the money. If there's a 4th M at all, it's mindset. Like shifting the mindset that we have, that we've always had low standards for our board. Oh, I don't want to ask too much of my board. They're volunteers. They're so nice. They give of their time. And we actually hold our boards to low standards instead of high standards. Like we're making you an owner of a corporation. So yes, you have to fundraise. Yes, you have to show up. Yes, the livelihood of our members is in your hands. Like we can't just hold people to low standards. So there's a mindset shift we have to move through, but that's the 4th M that maybe one day I will add. But right now my 3-part framework is the members, the meetings, and the money, and let's dive in. So the members. Here's my happy, smiling, well-adjusted board
Aw.
member with her iPad on a bench, thinking about all the things she has to do. And one of the things that you have to do when you're talking about members is think about the actual people, right? Like this is a human connection that you have to people. Like, who do I actually want in the right role in the organization? What people make up good board members? And I have a board course that I offer called Build a Rockstar Board, where we talk about the traits, like the actual traits that you want in a board member. And so you don't want someone who's selfish. You don't want someone who has conflicts of interest. You don't want someone who is looking out for themselves and not the organization. So you need to think about the right people, right? And we'll talk in a second about how to do that. And then you want to make sure you get the right people in the right roles. If you have someone who's a CPA and they're like, I don't want to do bookkeeping in my board role, I do it all day long, please don't put me on the finance committee. But you put them on the finance committee because that's where you need them, you might burn them out, right? So you need to put the right people in the right roles. And then there's this practice that is, again, it's alliteration. There's 3 R's here. The way you deal with members on the board is, how do we recruit them? How do we retain them? And then how do we remove them? Right? Sometimes they remove themselves at the end of a term, right? But sometimes you have to remove them. And we tend to think, oh, we can't do that. They're so nice, you know, but we actually need to remove bad performing people from our corporations. So one of the ways to get the right people is to use a job description. There is no organization in this country that would brag about not having a job description for an employee. So why do we all just basically not have job descriptions for our owners, right? We need to start thinking about one-page document that lays out what you should do and what you shouldn't do as a board member. From the very beginning, when you're interviewing someone to join your board, you push that page across the desk and say, this is what you're signing up for. Are you in or are you not? 10 times over, the problems we have inside nonprofits are internal. We caused them. They're inside the house. They're not stuff going on in the economy or the weather. We have brought the wrong people onto our board. So getting a job description and getting people to read that before they join the board is critical. Getting the right people in the right roles, we already talked about a little bit. And then the third thing is the division of labor. So that get in your lane chart that we talked about earlier, that is fundamental. If the treasurer of the board doesn't realize that they are responsible for the audit, that they are responsible for looking at the books once a month, if the treasurer just thinks that they're someone who knows math and that they're not actually responsible for due diligence, then you haven't done your due diligence through a division of labor. So everyone needs to know what their job is and what their job isn't. I literally had a board member crying and yelling at me one day because someone during a board meeting, I was the executive director, we were in a meeting, just him and the board chair. And this board member was so mad at me because I allowed another board member to be rude to him during a board meeting. And he faulted me for doing this. And I said, you know, listen, I'm the executive director. I work for you. I'm your employee. Like I work for the board. I am a guest at board meetings. I love being a partner with you all, but it is not my meeting. It is the board chair's meeting. It is your meeting. If someone in your meeting is being rude to you, I can't tell one of my bosses to be nice to you. That is not my place, right? He didn't understand that the ED was not the president of the board. So when you don't understand the division of labor, if you don't understand how things work, then you're going to have those kinds of like crying fits in a private meeting because he didn't understand who actually was responsible for protecting him from someone being abusive during a board meeting, right? So we need to understand what boards do, what the roles do, and what they don't do. Here's that chart we went through. I'm not going to go through it right now, but just know that it's fundamental in how you look at your board work. So the chair is a very, very special role in an organization. You need to have a strong chair. Every single executive director out there knows this, that you can be incredibly vulnerable. You end up doing all of the heavy lifting of the organization if you don't have a strong chair. When I say a strong chair, I mean leading by example, insisting that people have high standards, making sure that people show up to meetings, getting those things on the calendar all year round, modeling good behavior. These are all the things that a good chair needs to do, all the things that were on that get in your lane chart. But the chair has to coach. The chair has to be able to greet people as they're joining the board. Make sure that their entry into board service is a pleasant one. Help people along to honor their obligations. There really aren't that many obligations on the board. You pass a budget, you show up, you fundraise, and you supervise. It's not that complicated, but it is about 4 hours a month of work. right? And you just need to tell people this. So it's a little bit of coaching. The executive director and the chair have to have a very special relationship. On my website, there's a free download that I give away. Maybe it's in your toolkit, Nancy, but it's the executive director chair check-in agenda. I think we
Yeah,
talked
it's in the
about this.
toolkit.
It's in the toolkit. So every 2 weeks, the chair and the ED need to meet with each other and have a standing meeting with a standing set of agenda items, going over stuff from that infographic, the 10 things that an executive director does, so that you are regularly, there's no surprises. The chair can't be like in June saying, I had no idea you were launching 4 new programs and killing these other 2. Well, you would have known that if we were checking in every 2 weeks. Yes, it's an extra meeting. It will save your life as an executive director, and it will reduce friction if the chair does this. Half an hour or an hour every 2 weeks, the chair and the ED should be meeting and having regular check-ins. We give you a free template in the toolkit today. The other thing that the chair needs to be doing is running good meetings. I literally ran an organization where the chair was sort of like the patriarch of the organization and deeply respected and very much well-liked. Could not run a meeting to save his life. If board members were fighting with each other, he came from the philosophy that, like, clearly these 2 people need to hash this out, so let's just let them finish it, right? Like it was a very like man kind of thing to say, right? Let these 2 people just kind of duke it out. Everyone else on the board is like, this is making board service really shitty. Like, I don't enjoy this anymore because I'm watching these 2 people like hash it out I don't like this. And so his way of dealing with facilitating meetings was actually to abdicate his responsibility. And he wasn't checking in with people. Is this working for you? So we made a decision as an organization to rotate the facilitation. We didn't have money for a facilitator. So every meeting, a different board member would facilitate. And we learned who was actually a good facilitator. So we would go back and forth between the 2 good board members who were good facilitators. So that's what we ultimately did. So the chair, we positioned it as, you no longer have to supervise the meeting and call votes and all that stuff because you want to participate. We're going to let you participate, but it does mean someone else is going to facilitate. So that's one thing that you need to know about your chair. If they're not good at running a meeting, you need to either move it to someone else or get a different chair. And here's where we talk about recruiting, retaining, and removing. And I know it's a cute dog, right? I try to use it. And in some of my courses, I have hilarious GIFs and things. These are not even anywhere near as funny as some of my other pictures are. Anyway, so we're about to dive into the recruit, retain, remove section of the board, right? This is like how you actually get the right people onto your board. How do you get them out of your board? How do you keep the good ones? So we talked about earlier about creating a job description. I have a sample board job description somewhere. If folks really want one, I can send you one. I'm not sure if there's one in your toolkit, Nancy, but there's also this question of diversity. You cannot just say, oh, look, we're an all-white board. We need to go bring on people of color and people with disabilities and LGBTQ people. You can't just do that, right? You need to look around your organization and say, are we even capable of recruiting people and retaining them after they come on? Are they going to be here and be isolated? Or they're not going to feel supported? Have we done the real work as an organization to be anti-racist? Have we done the actual work we need to as an organization to make sure that we respect diversity and value it and that it's not just talk? Before you start recruiting people, young people, people of color, whatever, you need to do the hard work internally to make sure you're actually ready for that, right? Because that's the difficult thing, is it might actually be a journey that takes you a couple of years to solve. But I don't want people just being, I've literally seen board members say, we need more blacks, we need more gays. I've literally seen board members say that out loud during a board meeting and people are mortified. And a lot of organizations are populated by people who look just like the people who are the founders or just like the people who invited them. We all hang out with people that look just like ourselves. And that means that we tend to build teams of people that look just like ourselves. It doesn't mean that that's particularly racist, but it leads itself to homogeneous thinking. And that tends in itself in nonprofits to be white, male, affluent, right? So diversity is something critical, but I encourage you to do the hard work before you just start opening the floodgates and doing recruiting. Strategy. Most nonprofits don't have a strategy when they build their board at all. They literally don't. They're just like, we just find 12 people who will make meetings and fundraise, and please, and make sure that they're not jerks. You actually should consider actually developing a board strategy. Over the next 4 years, we will implement terms. Those terms will result in someone rolling off here and here and here. So we need to have a committee that prompts and gets us ready to have someone ready for when that person rolls off here, here, and here. And you should say, like when I was running the Tyler Clementi Foundation in New York, a national bullying prevention organization, we decided to say, you know, what if we set out our board strategy as who can actually help us reach our mission? So we actually we developed an intervention, a tool that we wanted to get into as many classrooms as we could around the country. So we thought if we actually want to build a board that is going to help us reach our mission, let's go after Randy Weingarten, who runs the AFT, American Federation of Teachers nationally, right? Like she can help get our tool into 1.7 million teachers' hands around the country, right? So we decided to approach Randy Weingarten, right? So if your organizations set out a strategy, like we're going to focus on board development that helps us reach our mission, put us out of business in 20 years, or we're going to have a strategy of just being as diverse geographically as we possibly can, which means the next 4 board additions have to be in the West and in the North or whatever, right? But I really strongly encourage folks to think through your strategy before you just start grabbing people who are good, right? And then the secondary goal is to make sure that they're diverse by skill set, race, and geography. And I'll say that again. Build a strategy, and then after that, look at those candidates and say, how do we then make sure that our board, given the strategy, is diverse by race, skill set, and geography? You want people on your board that are HR experts and finance and bookkeeping, things like that. Nancy?
Yeah, thank you. I was raising my hand. Okay. The one thing I always add, you know, the board source has that matrix of all the qualities and skills and attitudes and all of that stuff. That's fine, but it's real rigid. I mean, to me, the one thing you have to do too is ensure that whoever you're dealing with has some kind of leadership competencies. So that's something I think people miss, is that leadership competency.
Yeah, your board strategy should include actually interviewing these people. Like there should be a form that people aren't just invited to join the board, they should apply.
Right.
I actually have like a board application form. If someone isn't willing to take the step of applying, it's 1 page. And then the board interviewing them, like, why do you want to be here? Do you have any conflicts of interest? So the strategy should include an actual nominations committee that actually brings people on. So let's see here. How do you actually retain your board members? How do you not lose the good people, right? So training. So constantly board members are saying, I was never trained to do this. I was never told how to do this, right? So you can not only train your board, there's a lot of great things you can train your board members on. Board members love getting trained on issues related to the nonprofit. I'd love to learn how our actual soup kitchen works. I'd love to see how our lobbying program works. So you can train your board on how the organization operates, but you can also train the organization's board on fundraising. You can also train the board on board training. Like, this is what a good board member looks like. This is what bad board leadership looks like. Lots of different kinds of training. But when board members get that training, and I try to bake in half an hour or an hour of training into every other board meeting. If I have 4 board meetings a year, I have 1 hour of that at the front or at the end as a training. So we couple our trainings along with our governance. You want your board meetings to be fun. When board members are fighting with each other, and I had board members saying, this isn't fun anymore. Like, I'm willing to do hard work, but I'm just watching 2 guys go at it at this board meeting. Like, you want your board meetings to be fun. And part of the way you can create fun is by making it about people. Building, we say a little lower here on the slide, it's about rapport. It's about relationships, getting to know each other. There's this concept called conocimiento. It's a Spanish word that basically means a way of knowing, like knowing people. I always liken it to putting people before task. Like when you sit down, before you just dive into a meeting, say, hi, Sally, how are your kids? How is your dog doing? Like, how's life? How's your garden? You know, getting to know people before you dive into the work. It's a way of knowing each other. And rapport and relationships matter. One of the reasons why people keep coming back to board service is because they like the people. So make the time to get to know each other fun. And there's no reason why you can't have fun. In my board course, I give away 2 fun activities. I have board bingo. So you pass around the sheet around the room, and there's common words that are said during a board meeting, like strategic planning or rainy day fund. And then it makes it fun, but it also makes people have to pay attention. So if someone says the word rainy day fund during a board meeting, you get to cross off a little square on your board bingo. And I also have like a Mad Libs style. I call it Bad Libs. It's like gala gone wild. Like this gala has gone wild, and everyone can sit in pairs and do a Mad Libs libs, bad libs kind of activity together to keep things fun. So we've got to keep things fun in board meetings. You can do scavenger hunts on Zoom. You can do all sorts of fun things. The number one reason why board members leave a board or say that they are unsatisfied is that they never got an orientation.
Mhm.
This is absolutely hands down the number one thing that boards fail at. If I don't get that early job description and then an orientation telling me where the bodies are buried, what the work is, what the history of the organization is, like how do I solve this problem? If I don't get that kind of orientation, I'm going to constantly be lost and a little bit intimidated about asking questions. So we want to give people an orientation. Finally, diversity. I hammer on this a lot because if you try to bring people on that are token, like, oh, we got our first Latino, I guess we're good to go. Or we got our first youth board member who's under 18, I guess we're good to go. We've checked off the list. They're not going to stay. If that's the way you approach diversity, you're going to lose those people, and other people are going to think it's inauthentic. You're going to lose quality, good board members. A lot of the energy that we spend on the recruitment side is lost in retention because we didn't do it right, which is why earlier I said, get your diversity stuff in-house in order before you start recruiting. How to remove board members. This didn't work out. This is my graphic. This didn't work out at all. So if you need to remove a board member, first things first, your bylaws should allow for it. If your bylaws don't allow you to remove a board member who hasn't been there for 4 meetings, obviously there are exceptions. Someone had an injury, someone was pregnant, whatever. So someone misses a couple meetings, but if you have a board member who's not there, you need the power to remove them. Vote of no confidence. You need the majority, super majority of the board to be able to remove a board member. And that should be written into your bylaws. There is a document. I'm not sure, are we giving away the board agreement today or no? There's a way to get it for free from me. I'll drop it into the chat. But the board agreement is like, I don't think the board agreement is one of the things we're giving away today.
I don't think so.
Board agreement is, I have a whole course on this, but I'm going to give it away to you guys for free today. The board agreement is the single most powerful document you can use in any board. It solves all sorts of problems in one document. The board agreement is basically a contract that every new board member signs when they join the board, and they have to sign at the beginning of every term. So the board agreement is, like I said, a contract. It tells the board member, you will do these 3 basic things. You will avoid conflicts of interest, you will attend meetings, and you will do the work that we expect of you, which is usually fundraising and committee work, right? Those 3 or 4 things are basically what we ask of every board member. In return, we as an organization, we have things we owe you. We need to give you the financials when you ask for them for transparency. We need to make our staff available to you to help you in your board service, and we will provide you insurance so you're not sued for your votes on the board, right? The board agreement is this solid contract that basically says you behave like this, we'll behave like this. When someone breaks the contract, it's easy to remove them. And what's beautiful about a board agreement is the board member knows that they have not honored their end of the agreement. So they sometimes self-select and go, which is beautiful. I cannot tell you enough how many times when a board moves to a board agreement, it solves 80% of the problems, right? You still have to do some work and enforce it. Your chair has to enforce it. But you need a board agreement. And I will drop a link to my executive director toolkit, which is 7 different downloadable tools. You have to sign up to get it, but one of the tools that will come to you is the board agreement. It's already pre-filled out for you. You just got to change the terms. It's in Word, so you can edit it.
You're going to put that in the chat?
When I'm done with the next section, I will put it in the chat. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, sometimes I do this during a training. Oops. So write down somewhere on a notepad right next to you, what thing do you most want to change about your board members? And I encourage people to not journal, but just write 1 sentence down on a notepad or type it out right now. What thing do you most want to change about your board members? We're not going to have people say these things. I just want you to write it down to make it real in the world. All right, now the meetings, the second section. So the meetings are where the board actually gets to shine. The board actually comes together every month or every quarter, whatever it is, every other month, and this is where they vote. You can see these happy, smiling, well-adjusted people clapping to the executive director here because they are happy with the executive director's board report. And you don't want to see this Picard type image, right? Where he's just like, oh my God, is the meeting over yet? Meetings can be miserable or they can be just great fun that people look forward to. You want to make sure under your bylaws and just under corporate law that you're giving notice. You can't just call a board meeting at 5 o'clock on a Wednesday for the next day. You need to give 24, 48 hours notice, which is another reason why you should be actually sending out your board meetings a whole year in advance. don't choose the next meeting at the current meeting, right? That's just going to lead to lots of attendance issues. What you need to do is in January of every year, or let's say right now it's August, go pick the board meetings for the next 12 months and send them out. There's far less excuse for people missing a meeting if they had a year's notice or 9 months notice. So always, always, always be in the habit of getting your actual meetings sent out a whole year in advance so people have them locked in. Your attendance will go up, or at least you'll know who's flaking out on you. Make sure you start meetings on time and end them on time. Be respectful of people's time. If it's 5 o'clock and your board meeting is starting at 5 o'clock, you start at 5:01. You do not start at 5:15 because you've basically lost 15 minutes of productivity for 12 people, right? That's like hours of wasted time. So when you start on time, it'll force everyone to realize that you mean business, that we run efficient meetings here. We will start on time. If you miss it, you'll get caught up. Everyone will stare at you when you join the meeting late, and that'll create some peer pressure to actually show up on time, and we will end the meeting on time. So if we say it's going to go till 7, we will end at 7 unless there's a crisis, because we want you to be able to get back to your kids and to your life and to whatever. We don't want board service to be a chore. We want it to be enjoyable. So start your meetings on time, end them on time. Finally, facilitation. We talked about this earlier, so I won't belabor the point. Make sure you get a good person actually facilitating the meeting. Rotate the job. Committees. And so everyone gets a committee. Every single person on the board needs to be in a committee. Board meetings are not where business gets done. Board meetings are where decisions get made, but the actual work of the board is done in committees, just like Congress, if you think Congress gets work done. So here are on the left-hand side, there's a lot going on with a lot of bright colors here, but I'll just show you on the left-hand side. These are the typical standing committees that are listed in the bylaws of existing in an organization. Development committee is where fundraising happens. This is where the board creates a committee to hold the board accountable. Do not conflate a development committee as supervising the development director. That's not what's happening here. The development committee is a committee of the board. Therefore, they hold the board accountable to fundraising. That's what that committee does. The governance committee is the committee that governs the whole board. So this is where policies are written. This is where the nominations process happens. This is where policies, amendments to the bylaws, all that stuff happens in the governance committee. The executive committee, that's just the officers plus a lawyer. In my mind, it's the officers and a lawyer. And this is a committee of people who can act if the full group can't come together. So if there's an immediate contract that needs to be signed or an immediate decision in between board meetings, the executive committee is authorized to meet on behalf of the board. Finance committee. This is the committee supervising all dollars going in, all dollars going out. They may also supervise the audit. Some organizations have a personnel or HR committee. This handles whistleblower complaints, and it may handle the supervision of the executive director at the end of the year. Typically, it's the executive committee, but you could have a separate. The one role I think every board needs is an HR professional. If you have a finance person, an HR professional, and an attorney on your board, you're going to be way ahead of most nonprofits. Everyone needs an HR professional on your board. Finally, program. The board technically should be sort of supervising and possibly even creating the core programs of the organization, signing off on what the main things are that the organization does to achieve its mission. So these are the typical committees that exist out there. So write this down somewhere. What thing do you want to most change about your board meetings? Just write down one thing you hate about your board meetings or wish were better. All right, that's just for yourself. Part 3, the money. This is the fastest section. And this is where we talk about raising money. So the budget is the thing that the board passes once a year. Hopefully they pass it before the fiscal year begins. So in the month leading up to the fiscal year, the board should pass a budget. Budgets are just guesses. They're just basically, we think this is going to happen. So try to stay close to that. If we make a lot more or if we lose some, then we'll readjust. I tend to ask the board to pass a new budget 3 months into the year if something is wildly askew. Right? If like a global pandemic happened or something, I ask the board to come back and say, the budget no longer makes any sense for me to stay within these parameters. Let's pass a new one. So I typically come back 4 months into the year, 3 months into the year, and ask for a new version only if big things have happened. If not, I stay according to that budget generally. But again, budgets are not ironclad. They are just guidelines. The accounting. This is where the finance committee is actually looking at the money and making sure that it's actually being spent the way it should be, right? You should actually have someone who understands how to read financial statements. Reading financial statements and financial data is a highly unnatural act. None of the charts and graphs and spreadsheets look normal. We like looking at pictures and cats and landscapes. Looking at data inside a spreadsheet can make your eyes roll back in your head. Don't assume your board understands logical numbers inside cells. When I present data to my board, I highlight the 3 cells on the page in yellow that I want their eyeballs on, right? Down here, we are broke. Up here, we're doing great. Like, I explain and teach them. So when you do board trainings, you can actually train the board on how to read financial statements, because they are all probably terrified. I don't know, there's so many cells and boxes, this is terrifying me. But essentially, I just draw their eyes to 3 cells on the page that they need to be paying attention to. Here's where we're seriously over, here's where we're seriously under, but this number down here shows that we're actually gonna be okay. Right? I just like highlight 3 cells on the page and just keep them focused on that, and they feel like they've done due diligence. You don't need the full board looking at the financials every meeting. You need your finance committee doing that. Your full board should look at it once a quarter. Fundraising, so the money. So this is where boards have to do more. I believe a board should be responsible generally for at least 10% of the income, 10% of the budget. A board should be raising at least 10% of the money of the organization. The staff can go raise the other 90%, but the board should be raising 10%. Now, when you get to the size of the ACLU or, you know, the Red Cross, the board can't raise 10%, but most nonprofits are under $2 million. And I think that most boards need to be at 10% or more. So we talked about this earlier. I'm going to reiterate the concept. The board members are the owners of the nonprofit corporation. Owners create revenue. They are responsible for revenue. We don't talk to our board members like this, but we need to start talking like this. They're not corporations because no one shares in the profits, but they are not-for-profit corporations under state law. So for fundraising, this is my Julie Andrews abundance image. The hills are alive with money. We need to change our attitude about fundraising. Board members, lots of people see fundraising as like a chore. It's horrible. I don't like it. I don't want to ask my friends for money. They're going to ask me for money. I give of my time. I don't give it, like, you know, all these excuses we've seen but if your attitude is that fundraising sucks, you're not going to want to do it. But if you actually see it as a joyful thing, like I'm moving wealth from where it lives to where it can change lives. It's sitting in a checking account of some rich person, but it could be in our checking account where it could be like feeding the hungry and ending hunger, right? Like I'm liberating that money from the bank account and moving it to a great bank account, right? So fundraising is the shifting of wealth to solving problems, right? And when you see it like that, and you see it as like, I'm not asking you for a favor when I ask you for money. I'm doing you a favor by asking you for money. There's a world that you want to see with less pollution, more public health, and like great public gardens. I'm going to help you do that. You're the donor. I'm the doer. It's a partnership. I'm going to ask you for money, and we're going to go do the work. So when you start seeing fundraising as just like a partnership of just like getting money to the field, it becomes easier. So part of doing the fundraising at the board level is to smash these attitudes. That's why I said that the 4th M could be mindset, is to get the board into a different mindset of having high standards and seeing fundraising as a wonderful part of the job. People have a swagger about themselves when they raise money. They're like, yeah, I raised my $5 grand this year. I feel great about it. The development committee, we already talked about this. This is the committee of the board dedicated to making sure that the whole board is accountable. Finally, the board agreement. In that board agreement that we talked about earlier, this is the vehicle that you put your give or get policy in. This is the document where you say every board member has to raise $500 or $5,000 or whatever it is, or you have a full board give or get. If individual board members don't have an individual give or get and the whole board has to raise 10,000, then you just put that into the board agreement or whatever. You have to raise your portion of this. It is way more effective if you give people individual goals than a group goal. But the board agreement is where you hold people accountable. Training the board throughout the year on how to raise money will help you hit these goals and the mindset attitude issue we talked about. The board fundraising worksheet, I think, are we giving this away, Nancy? If not, I'll include
Not yours. No,
yeah.
I had something similar, I think, but yeah.
Yeah, you have I'll give people a link to this in case they also want my board fundraising worksheet, totally free. It's my highest performing tool that I give away throughout the year. So folks can use that also, unless you don't want me sharing it because you're already giving one away.
No. Go for it. Yeah.
And then other board tools. Some boards want other tools, like give me a list of donors, give me access to the donor database. There are tools you can give your board. Give me a sample script, so when I call people, I know what to do. These kinds of tools the organization should provide to the board so they can go do their fundraising, right? I'm not going to go into this, there's not enough time, but essentially storytelling. We need to be able to tell the stories of the people we serve, and we need to be able to tell the story of the organization. Board members will be better at selling the organization if they can tell those two stories. This is an infographic on my website. You can go to nonprofitfixer.com/resources. I'll drop that in the chat in a minute. Again, nonprofitfixer.com/resources. I have tons of freebies there. The infographic on storytelling is there. More so than data, statistics, or lists of programs, stories work. We are hardwired to remember and pass on stories. I can't tell you the 60 million, I can't tell you the story of 60 million different Syrian refugees that have left their country, but I can tell you the story of one. And simply telling the story of one is really powerful. And that quick little story alone could be something you teach a donor, a board member how to do. And that's the thing that they fundraise with all year long. They don't need to know the list of programs. They don't need to know the data. They don't need to know how many people you've served. Teach them to tell stories. Development committee, we're running out of time, right?
Right.
Yeah, so okay, so I'll skip. So yeah, we're done. We're done. So it's it.
Should I go back to my
Yep, I will stop sharing. I know that was a lot, so I'll drop my links into the chat, but that was a lot of content, I know, so I apologize for talking
No, that's fine.
people for over half an hour. So
That's fine. I had a few more things I wanted to say. Like, I do have a storytelling mini course that I'm going to be putting up online eventually. You just reminded me of that. But I'm going to skip all that other stuff I was going to do. There's a question here. We're ready for just a few minutes for questions before we get to the end. Do you see Peter's question for you, Sean?
let me scroll up for Peter's question. Give or get, how do you keep it from being a systematic way of limiting diversity of board membership? I get this question a lot. There's a softer racism of lower standards out there. I've seen boards do this all the time. If we push for diversity, how is this? I'm not saying that Peter's saying that. I'm saying that very often we assume that people of color can't raise money the way white people can. That's just a myth. You know, they may have fewer young people, and people of color and poor folks may be traveling in fewer circles of people that have resources, but it does not mean that they are not as energetic or as creative or whatever at raising money, right? People raise money all the time for stuff. We need not have lower standards. You can have a diverse board that raises money. You just need to work harder to go find those people. But the give or get policy needs to be very careful. You can't sit around a board meeting and say, hey, Sally, who's African-American or Latino or Asian, hey, Sally, how much are you giving this year? Like, finger pointing or putting someone on the spot about their personal gift is not okay. But having everyone shared in a common fundraising target is okay. Mm-hmm. So you don't want to put people in a place where they're going to feel poor or they're going to feel like whatever. But if you recruited them to the board telling them there was going to be a give-get, I bet you anything that you can find a great diverse universe of people that are willing to fundraise. We don't want to let ourselves have lower standards for our board and then assume that diversity means having lower standards on fundraising. Those things, that's an old way of thinking. All of us should move away from that.
Great answer. Stephanie wants the storytelling slide.
The storytelling slide is in the link I just shared in the chat, nonprofitfixer.com/resources. Tons of freebies on that page, including the infographic on storytelling. And I'll share the board fundraising worksheet and the ED toolkit in a second.
Okay. And then Thea says, we're an all-volunteer organization right now. What is the first position you recommend nonprofits budget for hire, especially considering the pandemic's effect on non-essential services?
What was the question? Like the salary for executive director?
Well, it says, what is the first position you recommend? I'm not sure, Thea, I understand the question.
We're all volunteer org right now. What is the first position you recommend a nonprofit's budget for hire, especially consider? Okay, I think what Thea's asking is, if you're an all volunteer organization and you're going to make your first hire, who is that first hire? Is that right, Thea? If so, my recommendation is it depends on the organization. If you have a working board, they may only need an assistant. Like some boards are like, we actually want to keep running things. So we just need an admin person to execute the will of the board. If you have enough money and you actually want to have an ED, like an executive director, that should be your first hire. But it all depends on your organization. Some boards are like, we are all actual practitioners and we own a building. We actually need an operations person to actually run the building that we were given, right? It all depends on your nonprofit. That's fine. Yeah, so we can talk privately or someone can email me. I'll put my email in the chat also so folks to ask questions afterward.
Okay, any other questions before we get to the I want to give Sean a chance, both of us a chance to tell you what we're doing. But first I'd like to thank Sean for his time and energy. Boy, I wish I had that kind of energy, Sean. Tell us about your offerings.
If you just really quickly, I have a free board webinar that I'm offering right now. It is like the precursor to my board course. It is an hour-long webinar that I do for free. It's a free training, basically. I will drop the link in. I think it's on the next slide, actually. It's a bit.ly that people can take. But it's just it's the 3-part framework that I just told you about, but it's a longer training and it's a webinar. So some of it will be repetitive, but it's really good and it's recorded. So you can go grab that. In this next slide, there's a bit.ly link for you.
There is a lot of fun stuff that Sean does.
Yeah, lots of courses, 7 different courses to help you run your nonprofit. But on the bottom right there, you can see the bit.ly for the free board webinar.
And by the way, folks, this is recorded. And so when you get the recording, you'll be able to come back to these individual slides and get links if you miss them now. All right, my turn. Shannon always tells me I don't promote enough. So here I go, I'm gonna promote something. So first of all, as I mentioned earlier, I think I've been putting some of the earlier meetups, transforming them into very short online courses. So this one, the monthly giving program we did in October of 2019, I believe it was, the description of it is on my website. But here's the good news. For anybody who has attended these meetups, you're gonna get an email. You're in a special email folder, but you'll get an email that has a link that if you decide you wanna take this little course, you get an automatic $20 discount. So it's 87 normally, so it's 67 with that link. So watch out for the link. So that's one. And then this is my primary course, Building Teams to Build Funds. The first 3 lessons of this is all about the CEO board relationship. It's about the fiduciary duties of the board. And then it's how, once you've built this constructive partnership, how to do a major gift program with the board and the staff. And it is a training on how to make an ask. And I have to say that one thing that you should know is true is there's no human being on the face of the planet that walks into the fundraising world the first time and goes, woohoo, let me go ask somebody for money. It doesn't work that way. You have to practice until you get comfortable and find out, wow, I think I actually love doing this. So this course gives you trains you in the 4 stages of making an ask. I want to thank again our Rockstar Zoom host, Shannon. Yay, there she is. And also you should know, if it weren't for her, I don't know that I'd ever laugh. I'm out here by myself now, since March, and Shannon keeps me laughing. So she's an important lady in my life. All right. And again, please join us at the platform Austin Nonprofit Meetup on meetup.com and in our closed Facebook group. And do we have any final questions before we sign off?
Kathy, I'm sorry. Nancy, I'm so used to saying Kathy. Just a reminder, everybody, if you want to save the chat, go to the 3 dots in the lower right-hand corner because there's a lot of links that people have shared. You'll probably want to refer back to them if you haven't already clicked on them and saved them as bookmarks.
Oh, how do you save them?
Just like I said, the whole chat will be saved if you click on the 3 dots in the lower right corner.
Save chat. Okay, I mean, I think I save it by itself up on the cloud. I didn't know you could do it here too.
Yeah, participants can do it too.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And again, I'm glad that some of you had your video on. I'm going to stop the share. So if there's some of you that still, oh, I miss you guys. So it's nice to see. And if anybody else wants to turn on the video for a second, just to wave hello. I know some people come in pajamas and don't want to do that, but Josh, so good to see you. How's your organization doing? Are you doing theater?
We're doing actually really well, surprisingly, in this time frame. We won a large chunk of money from a grant from the city of Austin, so we're pretty jazzed about that.
Now, would you tell Sean what you do in your organization?
The founder and executive director for Joshua Stage, an enrichment program for individuals with a wide range of special needs, featuring theater arts, improv arts, perhaps music, dance, photography, creative story, and after-school programs, camps, workshops, birthday parties, play dates, individual enrichment programs, and just a whole lot of fun.
It is fun.
Wow.
I went one day to observe his kids, and it was just a hoot. Very nice. I'm
That
glad you're
sounds
doing
awesome.
well. It's good to hear. You should put your success stories on the Facebook page, okay?
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else want to weigh in and say hello?
I need to go in about 2 minutes. So if there's a
Okay.
question for me, I'll take those in the next 2 minutes. Then I've got to bounce and get back to my day job.
Okay. Wow. I really appreciate you took the time in the middle. Plus, you're on Pacific time, so you really did take a chunk right out of your day.
My staff meeting, I had to skip my whole staff meeting, which
Oh,
I'm the leader of.
thank you.
Told them I'm helping some folks in Austin. I'll see you all tomorrow. So they're all just like, okay, what are you doing? So
We
Nancy,
appreciate
I'm
it.
going to unmute everybody so you guys can all clap and share and whatever. Here,
Okay.
go for it.
Okay. That's kind of cool.
Thank you so much, Sean. It was wonderful.
well, thanks to Nancy for making this happen. So if you guys have questions, you have my email address. Just shoot me questions if you missed them today. We have lots of free stuff on my website, and Nancy gave tons of free stuff in the toolkit today. So hopefully folks got a lot of value out of this, and hopefully it gets you all to spread the good word and get more attendance at more of these things in Austin.
Thank you, Sean. Take care.
Thanks again.
Excellent. Take care, everyone.
All right. All right. People are signing off. I didn't see Conley. I thought she was coming today. Darn it. Hi, Peter. Nice to meet
Hi.
you.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
All right. Take care.
You too. All right. Shannon, you're going to teach me something. Nancy, are you still here?
Yes.
You are? Shannon's going to teach me how to, what do you call it? You're going to,
I had to look it up because it's been so long since I've done it. It's basically creating a memoji. It's like your personal memoji. You know, so it's the person looks like you, your own avatar.
so are you going to share your screen so I learn how to do it?
I may have to, because it's going to be on your phone. So
Oh,
yeah, you're going to have to do it on your phone.
well, wait a minute. If it's going to be on my phone, how am I going to get it into my email like you did?
I usually do it from that's because I'm answering from my phone. When you see that.
Oh,
Sorry.
oh, are the directions the same on an email?
I can do it on email, but I can't do that. It never offers me the me for my
Oh.
regular email. I can do like I think it's like space bar control option, something like that. You know, command.
Oh.
Yeah,
Well, I don't operate on my phone very well.
no, sorry.
I know. Oh,
Yeah.
well,
Wait,
that's okay.
Shannon, that thing about clicking on the 3 dots, I'm telling you, I attended a film about the physicist David Bohm. It was very interesting, and the chat that was going on was also very
Oh, I
interesting.
bet.
I was trying to do copy and paste into Word
no.
documents.
Oh,
And so there's another David Bohm movie coming up about his relationship with Krishnamurti. And now that I know about the 3 dots, I can sit back and relax. I mean,
True.
that is the gift of the month, girlfriend.
Oh, good. Oh, yeah. No, the one thing I will say is when you get the chat, it's not pretty the way it looks.
No.
When you see it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It looks like a text file.
Yeah, it needs
You know, like a kind of like a
some
scrunched
carriage
up.
returns.
Yeah, like a scrunched up Excel spreadsheet. So I mean, you're going to have to kind of like work with it to make it to be able to see everything you want to see. but the links should all be in there for all the people that threw links into the chat feature.
Cool.
Well, since the four of us remaining on the call all know each other.
I don't know Barbara. Who's Barbara?
Oh, Barbara's on our board, and she's been a longtime friend and neighbor of
Oh,
mine.
maybe I met Barbara. I apologize. We
Barbara,
probably met.
turn on your microphone and say hi. Barbara?
Is she actually there?
I don't know. Maybe she went and.
She may not have. A mic.
Well,
Oh.
anyway, I just have to tell somebody, so you're it.
Okay.
There is this publication called the Caregiver Guide.
What's it called?
The Caregiver Guide. It's a whole bunch of resources for people who are caregivers to people who need caregivers. And it started actually with the Gray Panthers a while back, but now it's under the care of the aging services, Austin, whatever in the hell that is, Aging Services Committee that we're a member of. And it's time to update the sucker. Okay, so I volunteered for a chunk of it, and I finished proofreading for the 16th time and actually hit the send button at noontime today. And to have that project finished, it just it feels just good to tell somebody. Because they had a very wimpy little section on, well, what happens after you're dead. But boy, they got it now. They got all this shit about organ donation and whole body donation and,
Right.
and
Oh,
everything.
wow.
So it
Wow.
was really.
That's awesome.